the Second and Third Anglo-Powhatan Wars in an earlier video. We covered the First Anglo-Powhatan War and the Jamestown Massacre. This is a sequel to that video, where we'll be covering the Second and Third Anglo-Powhatan Wars, so if you haven't, we recommend watching the first one. Jamestown Aftermath. After the Powhatan attack on Jamestown, more than 300 colonists, or nearly a third of the colonial population, lay dead. The result of this devastatingly effective attack was a 10-year conflict, the Second Anglo-Powhatan War, that transformed the relationship between the natives and colonial English societies. The attack was a blow for the Virginia colony. Firstly, it had failed to generate profits for its investors, and now had failed to protect the lives of its indentured servants and other colonists in Virginia. The Second Anglo-Powhatan War, the English abandoned many of their more exposed settlements in the immediate aftermath of the attacks of March 22, 1622, huddling together in Jamestown and other relatively safe places as they decided what to do next. The situation was so dire that Governor Wyatt took refuge on the eastern shore for 6 weeks during the summer of 1622. Rather than counterattack right away, the English initially focused their attention on the Potomac River and the eastern shore, trading and strengthening alliances with more distant chiefdoms, while they developed a strategy for repaying the Powhatans. Then, throughout the fall and early winter of 1622-1623, they sacked the most vulnerable Powhatan villages. What followed was a guerrilla war. The Powhatans could strike and disappear instantly, and the English muskets were not as effective as the Powhatan bows and arrows. Adding to that, the natives simply knew the land better and could ambush their enemy at will. In 1623, the two sides arranged a meeting in which they would discuss peace. The English poisoned the drinks they offered at the meeting and then slaughtered the Powhatan delegation. This time, it was the Powhatans who were caught off guard and unprepared. The English burned the villages of a number of tribes, slaughtering as many natives as they could find. In 1624, both sides were ready for a major battle. The Powhatans assembled 800 bowmen deployed against only 60 Englishmen, who attempted to destroy the Powhatans' cornfields. When the Englishmen finally succeeded in destroying the cornfields, the bowmen gave up the fight and retreated. The mismatch between arrows and guns determined the winner in this open battle. The Powhatans suffered heavy casualties, but just 16 of the English were wounded. A peace was declared in 1628, but hostilities resumed in March 1629 and continued until a final peace was made in 1632. After that, the English began to expand their settlements on the eastern shore, and both sides of the James, as well as on the south of the York. Peace and the Third Anglo-Powhatan War, to prevent further problems. The English built a palisade in 1634 to form a stockade wall between them and the Powhatans. Made of wood, it stretched 6 miles across the Virginia Peninsula. By 1644, the English outnumbered the remaining natives in the region, and Powhatan, though 90 years old, launched another attack in an attempt to drive them from native land. On April 18, 1644, the Powhatans broke through the palisade with every warrior they could muster and killed between 400 to 500 colonists in a brutal surprise raid, launching the Third Anglo-Powhatan War. The timing in 1644 was similar to the attack in the spring of 1622. Choosing to attack when stockpiles of food were exhausted from the winter put the tribes at risk of another feed fight, with the English creating hunger by cutting down ripening corn in the fields in the harvest season. On the other hand, an assault in April allowed the natives to keep them dispersed on their seasonal round of wintertime hunting and less vulnerable to revenge attacks. The timing may reflect Powhatan's awareness of civil war in England and his awareness that he was near the end of his life. He had just one last chance to expel the colonists, or at least to force them to restrict their expansion. The young men in different towns under Powhatan Canoe's control, who had matured since the end of the Second Anglo-Powhatan War, also may have pushed for an attack as a way to establish their status as warriors. The Powhatans did not make any major follow-up to this attack. In February 1645, the colony ordered the construction of 3 frontier forts: Fort Charles at the Falls of the James, Fort James on the Chickahominy, and Fort Royal at the Falls of the York. In July, the English marched against many native villages, retaliating and taking resources. Aided by the Rappahannock and the Accomack native tribes, in August they attacked Powhatan Canoe's stronghold and captured him alongside many natives. Powhatan Canoe was taken to Jamestown, where he was shot in 1646. That year, in March, the English also built a 4th frontier fort, Fort Henry, where the modern city of Petersburg is located. The chief's death ended the Third Anglo-Powhatan War, and peace was formalized by the signing of the Treaty of 1646 between Powhatan Canoe's successor, Nicodemus, and Governor Berkeley. The peace treaty between the English colonists and the Powhatans called for the removal of the Powhatan Confederacy to an area north of the York River. The Treaty of 1646 dissolved the Powhatan Confederacy and conferred most of their land to the English. Nicodemus was chief of the Confederacy in name only, since most of the native people who had been living in the region 50 years prior were now dead, either from disease or through conflict, sold into slavery in the West Indies, or had fled the region and joined with other tribes elsewhere. Nakariensis' successor, Totopotomoy, was only chief of 2 tribes, and his successor, his wife, Kakakoeske, only ruled over the Pamunkey tribe.